Wow. Good afternoon. I don't hear you. Good afternoon. How are we? Wonderful. It's only one person wonderful, everybody else not sure? My name is Joe Lewis Washington, and I'm the seventh child born to Booker T. and Arthester Washington. As some of you may or may not know, in parts of the African American community, there's a bit of a mystique around the seventh born child. Some say we are strange. Some say we are different. Some say we are unique. But what everyone seems to agree is we often walk to a different drummer. And that's my legacy as well. I spent what I would consider a normal upbringing the first several years of my life, being very happy as the baby boy in the family. Because after I was born, my parents decided maybe 7 children is enough, we can stop now. Unfortunately for them, 4 years later, surprise arrived, and they named him Eli. My mother shared with me that she was very concerned at the pending birth of my brother, since I had spent so many years as the baby in the family, and she was concerned I would be very jealous and resentful. Fortunately, as it turned out, she said I was fantastic, and I'm sure you would agree. You can tell, right? She said I was her little helper. And as proof, she shared a photograph of the 3 of us. And in the photograph is my mother sitting in a chair, Eli in her lap, and Joe standing beside my mother, looking down at baby Eli as if he's baby Jesus, just sitting there smiling, big silly grin on my face. And so that was a nice memory. Another important memory and milestone where the 7th character, I think, started to form was when I was around 9 or 10 years old. And it involves watching the 6 p.m. news. In those days, the news only came on at 6 or at 10. So clearly this was prior to CNN and 24-hour news channels. And I remember watching the news with my parents, and the broadcaster was telling a news report about a holy war. And as a child of 9 or 10, going to church with my parents every Sunday, I wondered, how can you have a holy war? It seemed like a contradiction in terms. My next thought was, if I could sit down with those 2 parties, I'm sure I could get them to talk and stop fighting. So from a very early age, I was determined to change the world. And we'll get back to that. During my Chicago days, I became involved in various activities, both Chicago and outside of Chicago. One of those events involved a situation where the Lakota Nation, based in South Dakota, were facing a very, very severe winter. And at that point, it was reported as the most severe winter in South Dakota in history. And there was concern that the Lakota tribe, many members may starve because they were either homeless or without clothing or without food. So I organized a clothing drive in Chicago to get coats and hats and boots and whatever I can find. So started off with cleaning out my own closet and then going around the neighborhood, putting up flyers, etc. Part of this drive also was related to my mother telling us stories growing up, how her bloodline was Native American. So I've always felt this kinship to indigenous peoples, Native American, First Nation, etc. So as I'm in the midst of collecting these clothing, my brother Eli came to me with the question, why are you collecting these clothes for people in South Dakota? Right here on the south side of Chicago, there's also homeless people who need clothing and shelter and everything. Why not help them instead of helping all the way South Dakota? And my answer was one that I would often refer to in the subsequent years, and that was, I don't know. It's just what I think I need to do. Years later, I left Chicago, and it was a series of international postings. Here in the Netherlands 20 years ago, for 2 years, in Italy, and for the past 10 years with the UN peacekeeping mission in Sudan and South Sudan. Again, changing the world, saving the world, etc. And I would either call home, call the family, or come visit. And each time I would see my mother or speak to her on the phone, it was always the same question. What are you doing there? Tell those people your mother wants you to come home. You come get a job here. Why are you doing that? And again, the answer was, I don't know. Several years later, a wonderful thing happened during an ordinary conversation with my mother. And in the midst, she said, I don't know why you think you need to do what you're doing way over there in Africa. But I believe that you believe that this is what you need to do. And because this is what you believe, I support you. And that was one of the most wonderful periods in my life to have that kind of affirmation. After that time, I have to admit, I didn't quite manage to save the world, but don't tell anyone, you may not have noticed. But I did learn some other important lessons along the way. One was, first and foremost, save Joe. Second, instead of saving the world, try to do something today, wherever you are, no matter how big or how small. And with that notion in mind, when I arrived here in the Netherlands for the second time 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to meet some wonderful people at Ubuntu House. For those of you who don't know, Ubuntu House is a community center here in Lombok, which supports people without papers, people living in poverty, and people who are homeless. I expect homelessness, people without papers, people living in poverty in the US, but in the Netherlands, how is that possible? And I felt this is a story that needs to be told, because clearly if the ordinary Dutch population knew about it, they would be outraged and they would do something about it. Similarly, I've used this time to reconnect with the issues regarding people of African descent, whether in Chicago, in the US, in the Caribbean, on continental Africa, and here in Europe. Because people of African descent have made important contributions everywhere we go, and that's an important story that needs to be shared. I've also had the opportunity to come across wonderful, ordinary Dutch in the supermarkets, in the street, on the bus, who also have fantastic stories that also need to be heard. So there's all of these stories that's out there, and I thought maybe this organization that I came across would be the vehicle to do those stories. And that organization is the secret society of twisted storytellers. And I would imagine, like you, when I came across the name, I went, wow, that's a really cool name. And reading further the mission statement and to talk about healing communities, nations, the world, one story at a time, I said, yes, I want to be part of that. So I had the opportunity to contact Satori. We've had some wonderful conversations, and she said, yes, this is part of our global vision. Let's do it. So we're launching the Secret Society of Twisted Storytellers Europe edition, and this is the inauguration, and you're a part of it. So that's fantastic. My mother was a lover of hearing and telling stories. And I miss her a lot. But I will imagine she's right here at this first table, enjoying listening to the wonderful stories that we will share today and the interaction afterwards. So, Mother, this inaugural program is for you, New Beginners. Thank you very much.